Number 1. Cosmo DiNardo. When 4 young men vanished within 48 hours in July 2017, Bucks County, Pennsylvania, investigators had almost nothing. No bodies, no clear links, no solid leads. What emerged on a 90-acre family farm would reveal one of the coldest killing sprees the state had seen in years. Cosmo DiNardo was born in January 1997 into wealth. His parents ran a successful construction business and owned a large estate near New Hope. He attended private Catholic schools and appeared set for an easy life. Behind the surface, though, were severe issues. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia, committed involuntarily to psychiatric facilities several times, and showed increasingly erratic and violent behavior. By his early 20s, he had dropped out of college and turned to selling marijuana. Friends later said he often spoke casually about killing people, but no one reported it seriously. The disappearances started July 5, 2017. 19-year-old Jimmy Patrick told his family he was meeting someone for a deal and never returned. On July 7th, 3 more went missing. 19-year-old Dean Finocchiaro, 19, and early 20s friends Mark Sturgis and Tom Mio. All 4 had been in contact with Cosmo DiNardo shortly before vanishing. Cell records placed them near him. License plate readers caught DiNardo's truck and Mio's Nissan together on July 7. A friend told police DiNardo tried to sell him Mio's car for $500 the next day. Inside were Mio's essential medications he would never abandon. DiNardo was arrested July 10 on a firearms charge. He was barred from owning guns due to his mental health history. His father posted part of the $1 million bail, and he was released. Less than 24 hours later, on July 12, he was rearrested for trying to sell Mio's vehicle. Bail jumped to $5 million. Search warrants hit the family farm. Cadaver dogs found disturbed soil in a remote section. 12.5 feet down lay a grave with 3 bodies. Jimmy Patrick was still missing. Facing the evidence, DiNardo's lawyers negotiated, reveal Patrick's location and full details in exchange for taking death off the table. On July 13, he confessed to all 4 murders and named his cousin Sean Kratz as an accomplice. The accounts were brutal. On July 5, DiNardo lured Patrick with a fake marijuana deal, shot him, then used his father's backhoe to bury him half a mile from the house. July 7, he and Kratz picked up Finocchiaro on ATVs, drove him into the woods, and both shot him multiple times. They stuffed the body into an old oil tank pig roaster, doused it with gasoline, and burned it. Later that day, DiNardo invited Sturgis and Mio to the farm, under the guise of another deal. When they turned away, he opened fire, hitting Mio and paralyzing him from the waist down. Mio screamed he couldn't feel his legs. Sturgis tried to flee but was shot. DiNardo then drove the backhoe over the still-living Mio, crushing him. Both bodies went into a shallow grave. Finocchiaro's charred remains were added on top. Afterward, the cousins cleaned the scene and acted normal. Kratz grew anxious as police closed in. DiNardo stayed unnervingly calm. In May 2018, DiNardo pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder, robbery, conspiracy, and abuse of a corpse. Judge Jeffrey Finley said at sentencing that DiNardo treated human lives as worthless. He received 4 consecutive life sentences without parole. Kratz, after rejecting an initial deal, was convicted at trial and also got life. The motive? DiNardo claimed it was about small drug money debts, but the amounts were trivial. Prosecutors proved he planned and knew right from wrong despite his diagnosis. The farm was later sold, buildings demolished, land redeveloped. The case still lingers in Bucks County memory. If one person with mental illness could do that damage in days, consider what someone could do over 16 years in a nurse's uniform. That was Charles Cullen. Cullen worked as a registered nurse in 9 hospitals and nursing homes across New Jersey and Pennsylvania from 1984 to 2003. He confessed to killing at least 40 patients. Authorities believe the true count may reach 300, 400, making him possibly America's most prolific serial killer in healthcare. He used overdoses of digoxin, causing fatal heart rhythm, or insulin. He chose the sickest, elderly, ventilator-dependent, so deaths appeared natural. When suspicions arose, he quit, or was quietly let go. Hospitals rarely shared reasons. The case cracked at Somerset Medical Center in 2003. Nurse Amy Loughran noticed strange deaths and high digoxin levels. She wore a wire, got admissions from Cullen, who said the killings gave him control. Arrested December 14, 2003. He pleaded guilty in plea deals to avoid death row. 29 murders and 6 attempts in New Jersey, 11 consecutive life sentences, plus 7 more murders in Pennsylvania, additional life ternia. He's at New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. The scandal led to nationwide reforms, stricter background checks, mandatory suspicious death reporting, better medication tracking. In Philadelphia, Gary Heidnik ran the United Church of the Ministers of God from his North Marshall Street row house. From November 1986 to January 1987, he kidnapped 6 black women, luring them with cash or drugs. He chained them in a basement pit he dug, raped them repeatedly, tortured them with beatings and electric shocks, using live wires and flooded water. He starved them, and forced some to eat dog food mixed with human remains. Sandra Lindsay died hanging from a beam after days of deprivation. Heidnik cooked parts of her on the stove. Deborah Dudley was electrocuted in the pit. The 4 survivors, Josefina Rivera, Lisa Thomas, Jacqueline Askins, Agnes Adams, endured months of horror. Rivera escaped January 24, 1987 during a store trip and alerted police. Officers found the women and remains. Heidnik was convicted of 2 murders, multiple rapes and kidnappings. Defense claimed insanity. Jury rejected it. Sentenced to death in 1988, he was executed by lethal injection July 6, 1999, at Cy Rockview, the last Pennsylvania execution before a long moratorium. His crimes partly inspired Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. Nearby, Harrison Marty Graham murdered 7 women in 1986, 1987 in North Philadelphia. Victims were mostly drug users or sex workers in their 20s, 30s, strangled or beaten, bodies kept in his apartment, some wrapped, some in bags, one nearly skeletal. He lived among them, even with corpses. Neighbors complained about the stench. He blamed raccoons. Arrested August 1987 on an unrelated charge, police found the bodies. Convicted of 7 first-degree murders and corpse abuse, he got death in 1988. After a 2003 Supreme Court ruling on intellectual disability, his sentence became life without parole. He's at Cy Cole Township. In Dauphin County, Joseph Joey Miller killed 5 women between 1986 and 1990 around Harrisburg and Steelton, strangled or beaten, bodies dumped in woods or lots. Arrested 1990 after a tip in evidence, he confessed. 5 consecutive life sentences, still at Cy Houtsdale. In Allentown, teenager Harvey Miguel Robinson raped and murdered 3 women in 1993 at ages 17-18. Joan Berghardt shabbed 30-plus times. Charlotte Schmoyer, 22 Stabund, Jessica Jean Fortney. A survivor's description and DNA linked him. Convicted 1994, sentenced to death, one of America's youngest on death row. Still there at Cy Green, amid Pennsylvania's execution freeze. Finally, George Banks's 1982 Wilkes-Barre rampage killed 13 people, including 5 of his own children, ages 4, 11. He shot his girlfriend's family, then his ex-wife, their kids, and others with .22 and .25 caliber guns. After a standoff, he surrendered. Convicted 1983 of 12 first-degree and 1 third-degree murder, death sentence. Later ruled incompetent for execution due to mental state, resentenced to life. He died in prison November 3, 2025, at 82. Number 2. Charles Cullen. For more than 16 years, from 1988 to 2003, patients in hospitals and nursing homes across New Jersey and Pennsylvania checked in for routine care, surgery, or end-of-life treatment. Many never checked out. The person responsible was a registered nurse who moved from facility to facility, injecting lethal doses of medication into IV lines while the healthcare system repeatedly failed to stop him. Charles Edmund Cullen was born on February 22, 1960, in West Orange, New Jersey. He was the youngest of 8 children in a working-class family. His father, Edmund, a bus driver, died on September 17, 1960, when Charles was just 7 months old. His mother, Florence, an English war bride who had emigrated after World War II, raised the kids on a small pension. She was killed in a car accident when Cullen was 17, during his senior year at West Orange High School. He dropped out shortly after and enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1978. He served as a missile technician on a nuclear submarine, reaching the rank of petty officer, but felt bullied and isolated. After multiple suicide attempts and psychiatric evaluations, he received a general discharge in 1984. Back in New Jersey, Cullen enrolled at the Mountainside Hospital School of Nursing in Montclair. He graduated in 1986 or 1987, one of the few men in his class, and married Adrienne Taub that same year. They had 2 daughters. On paper, things looked stable. In reality, his first nursing job set the stage for what was to come. He started at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey, in the burn unit. On June 11, 1988, he killed his first confirmed victim, 72-year-old John Yango Sr., a retired judge, by administering a massive overdose of lidocaine that triggered cardiac arrest. Cullen later admitted to several more deaths at St. Barnabas, including insulin overdoses on patients with weakened immune systems. When the hospital investigated suspicious contaminated intravenous bags in early 1992, Cullen resigned before any formal charges. That became his pattern: suspicion, quiet exit, neutral reference, new job. He moved to Warren Hospital in Phillipsburg, New Jersey in February 1992. There he worked in the coronary care unit and killed at least 3 elderly women with digoxin overdoses: 90-year-old Lucy Mugavero on March 9, 1993, 85-year-old Mary Natoli on July 23, 1993, and 91-year-old Helen Dean on September 1, 1993. Questions arose about Dean's death, but Cullen passed a polygraph and quit in December 1993. His personal life was collapsing at the same time. He was physically and psychologically abusive to his wife and daughters, turning off the heat in winter, torturing the family's pet Yorkshire Terriers, and attempting suicide multiple times. Adrienne filed for divorce in 1993 and won custody with no visitation for him at one point. He was hospitalized at places like Muhlenberg Regional Medical Center and Carrier Clinic after breakdowns. By April 1994, Cullen was at Hunterdon Medical Center in Flemington, New Jersey in the ICU. He received an employee award for diligence in October 1994 while secretly killing more patients with digoxin. 71-year-old Leroy Sin on January 21, 1996. 75-year-old Earl Young on May 31, 1996. 49-year-old Catherine Dext on June 9, 1996. 65-year-old Frank Mazzacco on June 24, 1996. And 81-year-old Jesse Eichlin on July 10, 1996. He quit in October 1996 after his girlfriend ended their relationship. Next came a short stint at Morristown Memorial Hospital in New Jersey, where he was fired in August 1997 for poor performance. In February 1998, Cullen crossed into Pennsylvania and started at Liberty Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Allentown. He was fired in October after allegedly breaking a patient's arm. He picked up part-time work at Easton Hospital in the ICU that November, then moved to the burn unit at Lehigh Valley Hospital in Salisbury Township in December 1998. There he killed 78-year-old Ottomer Schramm on December 31, 1998, and 22-year-old Matthew Mattern on August 31, 1999. Mattern had been recovering from spleen surgery. Cullen attempted suicide again in January 2000 and was briefly at Warren County Crisis Center. He tried to kill 91-year-old Stella Danielchik with digoxin in February 2000 before leaving Lehigh Valley in April. He worked at St. Luke's Hospital in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, starting in June 2000. By then he had Pennsylvania nursing licenses and was bouncing between night shifts where oversight was minimal. In September 2002, he started at Somerset Medical Center in Somerville, New Jersey. Over the next 13 months, he killed at least 13 more patients, including Reverend Florian Gall, whose September 2003 death finally triggered a real investigation. An autopsy revealed lethal digoxin levels. Hospital staff noticed Cullen had been accessing and pulling medications for patients he wasn't assigned to. Critical care nurse Amy Loughran, who had become friends with Cullen, agreed to cooperate with police. She wore a hidden recorder. met him at a bar in December 2003, and got him to make evasive comments about the suspicious deaths. Cullen was arrested on December 14, 2003, initially on one count of murder and one of attempted murder. In interrogation, he confessed to around 40 killings but said his memory was foggy and that he often blacked out. He claimed at first it was mercy killings to end suffering, but many victims were stable or improving. Some in their 20s, others recovering from routine procedures. He cooperated fully to avoid the death penalty, helping identify victims across state lines. Prosecutors confirmed 29 murders, 22 in New Jersey and 7 in Pennsylvania, plus 6 attempted murders. Some experts and investigators who interviewed him, including author Charles Graeber, believe the real total could be 300 to 400, given the 10 hospitals and 1 nursing home where he worked, and the destroyed records at several facilities. In April 2004, Cullen pleaded guilty in New Jersey to 13 murders and 2 attempts. In March 2006, Superior Court Judge Paul Armstrong sentenced him to 11 consecutive life terms, 397 years without parole. Pennsylvania added more life sentences for the additional murders there. During the hearings, victims' families confronted him. He rarely made eye contact and sometimes appeared to doze at the defense table. One daughter of a victim called him an angel of death who showed no real remorse. The case exposed deep flaws in hospital oversight. Cullen had been fired or forced out at least 6 times, yet facilities gave neutral references to avoid liability. In response, New Jersey passed the Healthcare Professional Responsibility and Reporting Enhancement Act, known as the Cullen Law, in 2005. It requires healthcare entities to report impaired, incompetent, or dangerous employees to the state board and to share disciplinary records with future employers. Pennsylvania enacted similar protections for employers disclosing work histories. Nationwide, the scandal pushed for stricter background checks, mandatory suspicious death reviews, and better tracking of medication access. Cullen's story was detailed in Charles Graeber's 2013 book, The Good Nurse, and adapted into the 2022 Netflix film of the same name, starring Eddie Redmayne as Cullen and Jessica Chastain as Loughran. A companion documentary, Capturing the Killer Nurse, also came out that year. Today, at age 65, Charles Cullen is still incarcerated at New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. He will never be released. Number 3. Eric Frein. On a Friday night in September 2014, Pennsylvania State Police troopers at the Blooming Grove Barracks in the Pocono Mountains were finishing their shift when shots rang out from the tree line. What started as a routine evening turned into the deadliest attack on Pennsylvania law enforcement in decades, and the longest manhunt the state had ever seen. Eric Matthew Frein was born on May 3, 1983, in New Jersey. His family moved to Canadensis in the Pocono Mountains when he was young. His father, Eugene, a retired U.S. Army major, pushed military history and firearms on his son, though court records later showed Eugene had exaggerated his own service record and was an alcoholic who frequently ranted against the government. Frein's mother, Deborah, worked as a dental hygienist. Neighbors described the household as dysfunctional, with Eric often keeping to himself. He attended Pocono Mountain High School, where he was a standout on the rifle team, and appeared in the yearbook demonstrating marksmanship. Classmates remembered him as smart, but socially awkward, more at home in the woods than in social settings. After graduation in 2002, he took classes at East Stroudsburg University. First a semester in history in 2005, then 2 more in chemistry in 2011, but never finished a degree. He worked odd jobs, including at a local supermarket, and lived at home with his parents into his 30s. Frein became heavily involved in military simulation groups, or MILSIM. He dressed in Serbian military uniforms and reenacted battles from the Yugoslav wars of the 1990s, particularly those involving Bosnian Serb forces. Friends in those circles said he studied guerrilla warfare tactics obsessively, reading books on survivalism, improvised explosives, and anti-government resistance. Over time, his conversations turned darker. He expressed growing hatred for law enforcement and what he called government tyranny. In private notes discovered later, he wrote about wanting to spark a revolution by killing police officers, believing it would inspire others to rise up. By 2014, at age 31, Frein had spent months, possibly years, planning something. He practiced shooting in the woods behind his parents' house and mapped out the Blooming Grove Barracks, which was about 20 miles from where he lived. He chose the location because it was remote, surrounded by dense forest, and had a predictable shift change schedule. On September 12, 2014, at approximately 10:50 p.m., Frein lay in wait in the woods about 100 yards from the barracks parking lot. He was armed with a .308 caliber rifle fitted with a scope. As the late shift ended, Corporal Brian K. Dixon II, a 38-year-old Marine veteran and father of 2 young boys, walked out to his car. Frein fired multiple shots. Dixon was struck twice in the torso and died almost instantly. Trooper Alex Douglas, who ran to help his fallen colleague, was hit in the pelvis. The bullet shattered bones and caused massive internal damage. Douglas would survive, but only after more than 24 surgeries and the amputation of his right leg below the knee. Frein slipped away into the night. The initial investigation had almost nothing to go on. No witnesses, no vehicle description. But within hours, state police began piecing it together. 3 days later, on September 15, search teams found an abandoned 1999 Jeep Cherokee belonging to Frein's parents, stuck in a swamp about 5 miles from the barracks. Inside were .308 shell casings that matched the ones at the scene, camouflage clothing, military gear, and Frein's driver's license and social security card. That was the break. By September 16, Frein was named the sole suspect. What followed was unprecedented. Pennsylvania State Police called in help from the FBI, U.S. Marshals, and officers from across the Northeast. At its peak, nearly 1,000 personnel were involved in the search. Helicopters with infrared cameras flew overhead. SWAT teams and K-9 units combed through thick woods, abandoned cabins, and rocky terrain. Schools in Pike and Monroe counties closed for weeks. Residents were told to stay indoors, lock doors, and report anything suspicious. Hunting season was canceled in parts of the Poconos. The fear was real. Frein was believed to be armed and dangerous, possibly looking to target more officers. During the 48-day manhunt, Frein was sighted multiple times. He left behind clues that seemed deliberate. Serbian cigarettes, empty food wrappers, even soiled diapers at campsites, which investigators believed he used to throw off tracking dogs. He moved at night, slept in makeshift shelters, and lived off the land exactly as he had trained to do. In journals found later, he wrote that he was surprised the manhunt lasted as long as it did, and that he had expected to be caught sooner. He described watching news coverage of the search and feeling a mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. The operation cost the Pennsylvania State Police more than $11 million in overtime alone. When all supporting agencies were factored in, the total approached $12 million. It was the most expensive and longest manhunt in state history. On October 30, 2014, 48 days after the shooting, U.S. Marshals from the Special Operations Group were sweeping an area near the abandoned Birchwood Pocono Air Park, about 3 miles from Tannersville. Around 6 p.m., they spotted Frein in an open field near an old airplane hangar. He was unarmed and gaunt, wearing camouflage and carrying a backpack. He surrendered without a fight. A .308 rifle and a pistol were recovered nearby. He was taken into custody and transported back to the Blooming Grove Barracks, where he was processed. Investigators searched his parents' home and the woods where he had hidden. They found detailed journals and notes. In one entry written before the attack, Frein described the shooting as an assassination and said he hoped it would wake people up and start a revolution. He wrote about his disdain for police and his belief that violence against them was justified. Ballistics matched the rifle to the crime scene. His DNA was on the weapon. Phone records and witness statements from his Milsom group tied him to the planning. Frein was charged with 12 counts, including first-degree murder of a law enforcement officer, attempted murder, terrorism, weapons of mass destruction for mall pipe bombs he left in the woods during the manhunt, and discharge of a firearm into an occupied structure. His trial began in April 2017, in Pike County after jury selection was moved to ensure an impartial panel. Prosecutors presented over 500 pieces of evidence, including the journals, forensic matches, and Frein's own post-arrest statements. The defense tried to argue that years of family dysfunction and possible mental health issues diminished his capacity, pointing to the abusive home environment. But the jury rejected it. On April 19, 2017, after less than a day of deliberations, the jury convicted Frein on every count. 1 week later, on April 26, the same jury recommended the death penalty. Judge Gregory Chaylock formally sentenced him to death by lethal injection the next day. Frein showed little emotion throughout the proceedings. He was sent to death row at the State Correctional Institution at Phoenix in Montgomery County. Pennsylvania has not carried out an execution since 1999, so despite the sentence, Frein will almost certainly die in prison of natural causes. Appeals have dragged on for years, including arguments about his interrogation and mental state, but the conviction has held. Trooper Alex Douglas has undergone more than 25 surgeries and still deals with chronic pain, but he has returned to limited duty and become an advocate for officer safety. The family of Corporal Brian Dixon, his wife and 2 sons, continues to live with the loss. The ambush changed how state police handle shift changes and security at barracks across Pennsylvania. While Eric Frein remains locked away on death row, another killer was about to unleash horror in the suburbs of Bucks County. Number 4. Gary Heidnik. On March 24, 1987, a frantic 25-year-old woman named Josefina Rivera stumbled to a payphone in North Philadelphia and dialed 911. What she told the dispatcher sounded like something out of a nightmare. A man had been holding her and other women captive in his basement for months, chaining them, raping them, and torturing them. Officers responded to 3520 North Marshall Street, a rundown row house, and descended into the basement. There they found 3 women, Lisa Thomas, Jacqueline Askins, and Agnes Adams, naked, chained by their ankles to sewer pipes, emaciated and covered in filth. The pit they had been kept in was about 4 feet deep, covered with a wooden board. Nearby were tools of torment, chains, screwdrivers, and electrical wires. In the kitchen, police discovered a stock pot on the stove, with a human head boiling in it, and a freezer packed with 27 pounds of body parts labeled dog food. Gary Michael Heidnik had turned his home into one of the most horrific crime scenes in Pennsylvania history. Heidnik was born on November 22, 1943, in East Lake, Ohio, a Cleveland suburb. His parents, Michael and Ellen, divorced when he was young. His father was a strict bus driver who humiliated the boy for wetting the bed by hanging the sheets outside for neighbors to see. Heidnik suffered a head injury as a child after falling from a tree, which left a visible deformity on his skull. Despite an IQ measured between 130 and 148, he struggled socially, was bullied relentlessly for his appearance and awkwardness, and dropped out of high school. At 17, he enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1961, trained as a medic, and was stationed in West Germany. After 14 months, he was honorably discharged in 1962 due to schizoid personality disorder, severe headaches, dizziness, and nausea, symptoms that would follow him for life. Back in civilian life, Heidnik briefly worked as a psychiatric nurse at a Veterans Administration hospital, but was fired for poor performance. In 1970, his mother committed suicide. Heidnik was committed to psychiatric facilities more than 20 times over the next decade. Yet he showed a sharp financial mind. In 1971, he founded the United Church of the Ministers of God, ordaining himself as bishop. It started with just a few members but served as a tax shelter. Using disability checks and a $1,500 initial investment, he turned the funds into more than $500,000, equivalent to over $1.4 million today, through savvy stock trades in companies like Merrill Lynch. He bought luxury cars, including a Rolls-Royce and a customized Cadillac, and lived what appeared to be a comfortable life. In 1978, Heidnik's darker side surfaced publicly for the first time. He convinced his girlfriend's mentally disabled sister, Alberta Davidson, to leave her care facility for a day out. Instead, he chained her in the basement of his home, raped and assaulted her for several days. He was convicted of kidnapping, rape, and related charges but was found not guilty by reason of insanity and sent to a mental institution instead of prison. He was released in 1983 after serving about 4 years. By the mid-1980s, Heidnik had bought the 3-story row house at 3520 North Marshall Street and advertised his church in local papers, luring vulnerable people. He had a twisted plan: to build a harem of 10 black women, impregnate them, and create what he called a perfect race of mixed-race children to improve society. Starting on Thanksgiving Day 1986, he began abducting women from the streets of North Philadelphia, many of them sex workers or those struggling with addiction and poverty. His first victim was Josefina Rivera, 25, picked up on November 26, 1986. He offered her money for sex, then drove her home, forced her at gunpoint into the basement, stripped her, and chained her to a pipe. Over the next 4 months, he added 5 more. Sandra Lindsay, 24, on December 3rd, Lisa Thomas, 19, in January 1987, Jacqueline Askins, 18 around the same time, Deborah Dudley, 23, in February, and Agnes Adams, 18, in March. The conditions in the basement were unimaginable. Heidnik dug a pit in the floor, about 4 by 7 feet and 3.5 feet deep. The women were kept naked, chained by their ankles, forced to sleep in their own waste. He rationed food and water to control them, sometimes starving them for days. He raped them daily, often in front of the others. He used screwdrivers to puncture their eardrums so they couldn't hear him approaching from upstairs. Beatings were constant. He established a seniority system where one woman was put in charge of the others, creating distrust and preventing escape plans. Sandra Lindsay was the first to die. In early February 1987, Heidnik punished her for trying to escape by suspending her from a ceiling beam by one wrist for days. She died on February 7 from dehydration, starvation, and exhaustion. Heidnik dismembered her body in the bathtub, boiled her head on the stove. Neighbors later complained about the smell, and ground up parts of her flesh, mixing it with dog food and forcing the surviving women to eat it. He stored the rest in the freezer. Deborah Dudley became the second fatality. After she argued with him, Heidnik filled the pit with water, forced the women to stand in it, and electrocuted Dudley by touching live wires from a wall outlet to her chains. She died on March 18, 1987. Heidnik wrapped her body and dumped it in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. Rivera survived by playing along. She convinced Heidnik she was loyal and could help him find more women to complete his harem. On March 24, he let her leave the house to recruit. Instead, she went to her boyfriend's apartment and called police. Officers arrested Heidnik at a gas station where he was waiting for her to return. A search of the house freed the 3 remaining women, who were treated for severe dehydration, malnutrition, and injuries. Heidnik was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 6 counts of kidnapping, 5 counts of rape, 4 counts of aggravated assault, and other offenses. His 1988 trial was a spectacle. Defense attorney Charles Peruto Jr. mounted an insanity defense, dressing Heidnik in disheveled clothes and calling experts to testify about his long history of mental illness, delusions, and institutionalizations. But prosecutor Charles Gallagher dismantled it. He showed that Heidnik had managed complex stock portfolios, run a church, planned the abductions meticulously, and taken steps to avoid detection. The jury deliberated less than a day before convicting him on all counts on July 1, 1988. They recommended death. Heidnik was sent to death row at Cy Rockview. Appeals dragged on for years. He attempted suicide multiple times, including overdosing on Thorazine in 1988, which put him in a brief coma. In 1997, his daughter tried to block his execution by claiming he was incompetent, but courts rejected it. On July 6, 1999, at age 55, he was executed by lethal injection, the last person put to death in Pennsylvania to this day. His final meal was 2 slices of cheese pizza and black coffee. He showed no remorse. The house on North Marshall Street was eventually demolished. The case shocked the nation and inspired elements of the Buffalo Bill character in Thomas Harris's novel and film The Silence of the Lambs, the basement captivity, the pit, the skin-related horrors. Survivors like Josefina Rivera have spoken publicly about the ordeal, crediting her survival to a mix of cunning and sheer will. The other women rebuilt their lives as best they could, though the trauma lingered. While Heidnik's basement chamber represented pure sadism, a different kind of threat was brewing in Pittsburgh, one fueled by ideology and rage. Number 5. Richard Poplawski. On April 4, 2009, a routine domestic disturbance call in Pittsburgh's Stanton Heights neighborhood ended with 3 police officers dead, the deadliest single-day loss in the history of the Pittsburgh Police Department. The man responsible was 22-year-old Richard Andrew Poplawski, a self-radicalized white supremacist who had turned his mother's house into a fortified ambush site. Poplawski was born on September 12, 1986, in Pittsburgh. His parents divorced early in his life, and he grew up in the Fairfield Street home with his mother Margaret and his grandmother. From a young age, he showed signs of trouble. He was expelled from Taylor Alderdice High School for repeated fights and disciplinary issues. In 2005, he enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps, but lasted only a few weeks in basic training. He was discharged after throwing a food tray at a drill instructor during an argument. Back in Pittsburgh, he bounced between low-paying jobs, glass factory work, security gigs, while living at home and spending most of his time on the internet. By his late teens, Poplawski had become deeply immersed in online white supremacist circles. He was a regular on Stormfront.org, the largest neo-Nazi forum at the time. Under screen names like Braced for Fate, he posted hundreds of times about his hatred of black people, Jews, immigrants, and law enforcement. He repeatedly referenced the Zionist-occupied government, or ZOG, claiming it controlled the United States. After Barack Obama's election, in November 2008, his posts grew more urgent. He wrote that Obama would confiscate all privately owned firearms and declare martial law. In one March 2009 post, he warned that the police are the government's enforcers, and that they would be the ones coming for guns. He told friends he was preparing for a race war and an economic collapse. He legally purchased multiple firearms, including rifles, shotguns, and handguns, and amassed thousands of rounds of ammunition. The morning of April 4 started with an argument that had been building for weeks. Poplawski's dogs kept urinating on the carpet and furniture. His mother, Margaret, had finally had enough. Around 7 a.m., she confronted him in the living room. The dispute turned loud and physical. Margaret retreated to the basement and dialed 911. She told the dispatcher her son was acting crazy, that he had multiple guns in the house, and that she wanted officers to remove him. That detail about the firearms was never relayed to the responding officers. At 7:11 a.m., officers Paul J. Ciulo II and Stephen J. Maley pulled up to 1016 Fairfield Street. Ciulo, 36, was a 13-year veteran known for his steady presence on the street. Maley, 29, had been on the force for just over a year and was engaged to be married. Margaret met them at the door and let them inside. As the two officers stepped into the living room, Poplawski was already in position behind a couch, wearing a bulletproof vest and armed with a Yugoslavian Zastava M70 rifle, often misidentified in early reports as an AK-47, a 12-gauge shotgun, and 2 handguns. He opened fire without a word. A shotgun blast struck Ciulo in the head at close range, killing him instantly. Maley drew his service pistol and returned fire, hitting Poplawski in the chest and shoulder, but the vest absorbed the rounds. Poplawski then unleashed a burst from the rifle, striking Maley multiple times in the head and torso. Maley collapsed and died seconds later. The desperate radio calls went out. Shots fired. Officer down. Officer Eric G. Kelly, 41, a 14-year veteran who had just finished his midnight shift, was driving home when he heard the traffic. He turned his unmarked car around and raced to the scene. As he pulled up on Fairfield Street and stepped out to help, Poplawski fired from the house, hitting Kelly in the torso with multiple rifle rounds. Kelly went down in the street. Officer Timothy McManaway arrived moments later. He saw Kelly still conscious and waving weakly. Despite being shot in the hand, McManaway ran to Kelly, dragged him behind a patrol car, and tried to stop the bleeding. Kelly died a short time later from his wounds. McManaway and another officer were also wounded in the exchange. What followed was a 4-hour siege. More than 100 officers from Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, and the Pennsylvania State Police surrounded the house. SWAT teams used armored vehicles and fired more than 600 rounds in total. Poplawski moved between windows and doorways, returning fire. At one point, he called a friend from inside and said calmly, "I think I'm going to lose my life today, but I'm ready for it." He was eventually struck in both legs by police gunfire. Around 11 a.m., unable to stand, he walked out the front door with his hands raised and surrendered. Inside the house, officers found a war zone. The Zastava rifle, shotgun, handguns, body armor, thousands of rounds, and several Molotov cocktails were recovered. They also discovered white supremacist books, Nazi flags, and a computer full of Stormfront posts. Ballistics later matched every bullet that killed the 3 officers to Poplawski's weapons. Poplawski was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, 6 counts of attempted murder of police officers, and dozens of other felonies. His trial opened on June 20, 2011, in Allegheny County before Judge Jeffrey A. Manning. Prosecutors presented over 200 pieces of evidence, including the 911 tape, ballistics reports, DNA, and Poplawski's own online writings that showed months of planning and hatred toward police. Witnesses testified he had bragged about wanting to make the history books by killing officers. The defense argued his unstable family background, possible mental health issues, and lack of a prior criminal record as reasons for mercy. But the jury saw clear premeditation. On June 25, 2011, after less than 8 hours of deliberations, the jury convicted him on every count. 3 days later, on June 28, the same panel voted unanimously for the death penalty. Judge Manning formally sentenced him to death by lethal injection on 3 separate counts, plus hundreds of years on the other charges. Poplawski was transferred to death row at Cy Green in Waynesburg. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court upheld the conviction and sentence in a 2015 ruling. In October 2024, Poplawski filed new post-conviction claims alleging jury misconduct during the penalty phase, but he remains on death row. Pennsylvania has not carried out an execution since 1999, so he will almost certainly spend the rest of his life in a maximum security cell. The 3 fallen officers left behind devastated families. Paul Ciullo II is survived by his wife and 2 young children. Stephen Mele's fiancée spoke at his funeral about the future they had planned. Eric Kelly left a wife and 3 kids. Memorial services drew thousands. The city renamed streets, built playgrounds, and established scholarships in their names. April 4 is now observed annually as a day of remembrance by the Pittsburgh Police Department. The shooting forced immediate changes. Dispatch protocols were updated so that any mention of firearms on a domestic call is immediately relayed to responding units. Officers now receive enhanced training on barricaded suspects and active shooter scenarios. The case also became a textbook example of how online radicalization can turn into real-world violence. Poplawski's Stormfront activity was cited in federal reports on domestic extremism, while Poplawski's rampage was driven by ideology and paranoia. The next Pennsylvania killer on this list showed that even someone born into wealth and opportunity could commit acts of unimaginable cruelty in a matter of days. Number 6. John DuPont. John Eleuthère DuPont was born into a level of wealth almost impossible for the average American to comprehend. His family name, DuPont, had been tied to gunpowder, chemicals, and industrial power for generations, and the fortune built from it shaped every part of his life. He grew up on a massive 800-acre estate, known as Liseter Hall Farm, in Newtown Square. A property so large it operated almost like its own isolated world. His mother, Jean Liseter Austin DuPont, controlled a thoroughbred horse operation from the same land. And after his parents divorced when he was still a toddler, she became the dominant figure in his life. Servants, caretakers, and staff filled the property, but almost none of them were peers. His daily interactions consisted of adults paid to be near him, not people who chose to be. That isolation shaped him early, and throughout his adolescence, he developed almost no consistent friendships. Despite this loneliness, he wasn't unintelligent. He attended the University of Pennsylvania briefly, before transferring to the University of Miami, where he swam competitively, studied biology, and earned a degree. He then pursued graduate work in natural sciences, developing an interest in birds, shells, and marine life. His wealth allowed him to fund expeditions and academic projects at will, and by the early 1970s he had published legitimate scientific papers in ornithology and conchology. Using his personal fortune, he founded the Delaware Museum of Natural History in 1972, a museum that still exists today. There, he served as a self-styled researcher, donor, and scientific authority, and although some scientists questioned the legitimacy of his credentials, the money behind him made those questions secondary. But academic interests never grounded him socially. People who knew him described him as awkward, paranoid, and easily fixated on unusual ideas. His relationships were shallow, and often dictated by what he could fund rather than who he was. By the early 1980s, DuPont moved from birds to sports, taking an intense interest in athletics, swimming, pentathlon, and ultimately wrestling. Wrestling drew him in the most, partly because its culture valued discipline, and partly because wrestlers operated within small, tight-knit communities that DuPont hoped he could buy his way into. After his mother died in 1988, he took full control of the estate and renamed part of it Foxcatcher Farm, a title he used for the sports programs he funded. He built state-of-the-art wrestling facilities, Olympic-level training rooms, housing units, and support buildings. For athletes struggling for funding, Foxcatcher felt like a rare blessing. Free place to live, train, and work toward world-level competition without constant financial pressure. Top wrestlers across the United States accepted his invitations, including Mark Schultz and Dave Schultz, two of the most accomplished competitors in American freestyle history. Dave Schultz, an Olympic gold medalist and multiple-time world champion, became one of the key figures at Foxcatcher. He lived on the property with his wife Nancy and their children, working as a coach and mentor for athletes training under DuPont's sponsorship. To many wrestlers, Dave was the heart of the facility. Kind, patient, able to communicate with people of every background, and grounded in a way that counterbalanced DuPont's erratic personality. Even DuPont, who regularly clashed with athletes, seemed to maintain a respectful if complicated relationship with him. Behind the scenes, though, DuPont's mental state was unraveling. After the death of his mother, the last stabilizing force in his life, his paranoia deepened. He reported seeing non-existent intruders around the estate. He believed houses on his property were wired with secret tunnels. He told wrestlers he was part of historical bloodlines that made him spiritually important and asked to be addressed with strange titles. He banned people from wearing black because he believed it symbolized evil. He fired guns inside buildings. At one point, he attempted to drive a tank onto the property. Staff reported his belief that demons or ghosts were coming through the walls. Several psychiatrists later described these behaviors as consistent with severe paranoid schizophrenia, but his wealth made intervention nearly impossible. No family member challenged him legally. No court forced him into treatment. And because he funded USA wrestling programs, Olympic networks, and national-level organizations, many people hesitated to confront him directly. By the mid-1990s, Foxcatcher had become a space where world-class athletes trained, while also navigating the unpredictable behavior of the man who paid for everything. The final escalation came on January 26, 1996. That afternoon, DuPont asked his security consultant Patrick Goodall to drive him to the Schultz residence. Goodall would later testify that DuPont gave no explanation, no warning, no hint of what he intended to do. When they arrived, Dave Schultz was outside, working on his car. DuPont stepped out of his Lincoln Town car, holding a .44 Magnum revolver, raised it, and fired. The first bullet hit Dave in the chest. A second entered his shoulder. As Dave collapsed to the ground, DuPont fired a third bullet into his back. Nancy Schultz saw the shooting from the doorway. and called 911 immediately. Multiple witnesses confirmed the scene and the shooter. There was no chase, no confusion, no attempt by DuPont to deny what he had done. He simply got back into the vehicle and returned to his mansion. For the next 48 hours, the estate became a fortified standoff. Police surrounded the property, aware that DuPont's private arsenal included rifles, shotguns, pistols, and high-powered ammunition. They knew he was unpredictable and potentially dangerous to himself or others. Officers used negotiators, remote-operated equipment, and surveillance to monitor the building. Eventually, they discovered that the mansion's heating system required an external unit. They shut it off, forcing DuPont to leave the house to fix it. When he stepped outside wearing a winter coat, SWAT officers tackled and arrested him. The legal proceedings following the arrest focused entirely on the question of mental state. Prosecutors from Delaware County, including Dennis McAndrews, argued that DuPont knew he had committed a crime. They pointed to his deliberate choice of weapon, his decision to approach Schultz directly, and previous threats he had made against other wrestlers. Their experts included Dr. Park Dietz, who testified that while DuPont had mental illness, he was still capable of understanding the nature of his actions. The defense countered using psychiatric evaluations conducted during his commitment to Norristown State Hospital. Multiple experts stated DuPont suffered from delusions involving government conspiracies, espionage, and religious identity. Some of these delusions specifically targeted wrestlers at Foxcatcher. One claim he made was that Dave Schultz was part of a Russian plot against him, a belief that surfaced repeatedly during interviews. In September 1996, a judge ruled DuPont incompetent to stand trial and ordered him into treatment. After months of medication, evaluations, and legal motions, he was declared competent in December. The trial began in January 1997. Over several weeks, jurors listened to accounts of DuPont's increasingly detached behavior, firing shots into the floor near athletes, hallucinating animals crawling through walls, insisting that he was the Dalai Lama, and claiming that certain wrestlers were controlling his thoughts. On February 25, 1997, the jury issued a verdict: guilty of third-degree murder, but mentally ill. This meant they believed he intentionally killed Dave Schultz and understood the act, but acknowledged the severity of his psychiatric disorders. Judge Patricia Jenkins sentenced him to 13 to 30 years at the State Correctional Institution at Cy Laurel Highlands. In prison, DuPont lived an isolated life. In 2010, he died at age 72 from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. His will caused additional controversy. He attempted to leave a large portion of his estate to a Bulgarian wrestler, Valentin Yordanov, and Yordanov's relatives. Several legal challenges followed, with arguments that DuPont had been mentally incompetent when drafting the will. Parts of the estate were eventually liquidated, and the main property was sold and redeveloped. The Foxcatcher mansion was demolished in 2013. The wrestling facility was removed. Portions of the grounds now belong to the Episcopal Academy. Public interest in the case resurfaced when director Bennett Miller released Foxcatcher starring Steve Carell, Channing Tatum, and Mark Ruffalo. The film focused on the psychological deterioration of John DuPont and the complicated dynamic between him and the Schultz brothers. Dave's brother, Mark Schultz, later wrote a memoir titled Foxcatcher: The True Story of My Brother's Murder, My Years with John DuPont, and the Quest for Olympic Gold, offering his own account of the events at the estate and the years leading up to the shooting. Dave Schultz's legacy remains deeply rooted within the wrestling community. Multiple tournaments, awards, and scholarships bear his name, recognizing athletes who demonstrate technical excellence and sportsmanship. His influence on American wrestling is often described as irreplaceable. For many, the tragedy of Foxcatcher represents the collision of unchecked wealth, untreated mental illness, and an athletic community that ignored warning signs for too long. DuPont's crime shocked Pennsylvania not simply because of who he killed, but because of who he was: one of the richest men in the state, a patron of Olympic sports, a public figure surrounded by national-level athletes. His descent into violence revealed the extent to which power and privilege can protect someone from intervention until the consequences become irreversible. And long after Foxcatcher vanished from the landscape, the story continues to stand as one of the most disturbing chapters in Pennsylvania's criminal history. Number 7. Richard Baumhammers. Richard Scott Baumhammers was born in May 1965 in Pittsburgh. The son of Latvian immigrants who had escaped Soviet control and built successful careers as dentists. His parents operated a prosperous dental practice near University of Pittsburgh and raised him in Mount Lebanon, one of the region's most affluent suburbs. Baumhammers attended respected local schools, played on the high school football team as a second-string kicker, and appeared to be positioned for a conventional upper-middle-class life. After graduating from Mount Lebanon High School in 1983, he enrolled at Kent State University, earning a bachelor's degree in 1989. He then attended Cumberland School of Law in Alabama, later completing a master's degree in international law. By the early 1990s, he was licensed to practice law in Pennsylvania and briefly worked as an immigration attorney, assisting non-citizens seeking residency in the United States. For investigators and reporters, the irony of this career choice became obvious only years later. Behind the academic credentials and professional title, Baumhammers was already in psychiatric decline. Throughout the 1990s, he suffered from delusional disorder and was repeatedly evaluated by mental health professionals. Records from this period describe him reporting that the FBI and CIA monitored him, that his skin was peeling off, and that unseen forces were harming him. Dermatologists confirmed nothing was wrong with his skin. Psychologists documented that his beliefs were fixed, irrational, and resistant to explanation. His parents attempted to manage his deteriorating condition, but his symptoms intensified. During this time, he moved frequently. He lived in Atlanta for several years while practicing immigration law. After returning to Pennsylvania, he lived with his parents in Mount Lebanon and traveled regularly to Latvia, attempting to reclaim property he believed his family had owned before Soviet occupation. These trips also connected him with far-right nationalist groups, reinforcing the extremist ideas he was absorbing online. He read neo-Nazi propaganda, studied white supremacist ideology, and became active on Stormfront, one of the earliest large online hubs for extremist content. His postings expressed hostility toward immigrants, religious minorities, and non-white communities. In April 1999, he legally purchased a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver. Days later, he was formally diagnosed with delusional disorder. Around the same time, he attempted to build a political presence by launching the Free Market Party, a one-man website that advocated ending non-white immigration and praised Adolf Hitler and Timothy McVeigh. No one joined his party. He took the site down after a few months. His violent tendencies became publicly visible when in October 1999, while in Paris, he struck a bartender whom he believed was Jewish. French police took him to a psychiatric ward, but released him after evaluation. Back in the United States, his behavior remained erratic. He isolated himself inside the family home, spent long hours online consuming extremist propaganda, and developed the belief that white Americans were being systematically displaced. He viewed the March 2000 shooting spree by Ronald Taylor, who targeted white victims in nearby Wilkinsburg, as evidence of racial conflict. Investigators later concluded that Baumhammers interpreted Taylor's actions as a justification for his own attack and believed that violence would trigger a larger race war. At approximately 1:00 p.m. on April 28, 2000, Baumhammers walked next door from his parents' home to the residence of Anita Gordon, a 63-year-old Jewish neighbor. He shot her once, fatally. Afterward, he attempted to ignite her house with a Molotov cocktail, but the fire did not spread. He returned to his black Jeep and began a 2-county sequence of attacks. His next stop was Bethel Congregation, the synagogue Gordon attended. He vandalized the building by spray painting swastikas and firing rounds through the windows. From there, he drove to Scott Township and entered the Indian grocery store owned by Anil Thakur and Sandeep Patel. Thakur was killed. Patel survived the initial shooting, but was paralyzed from the neck down and died 7 years later due to complications from his injuries. Baumhammers then continued to Robinson Township, where he entered Yafei Chinese cuisine and shot 2 restaurant workers, Thao Pham and An Lu, both of whom died. After fleeing the scene, he drove to the C's Kim Karate Studio in Center Township, Beaver County, where he shot Gary Lee, a 22-year-old African-American man from Aliquippa. Lee died shortly afterward at a hospital. In less than 2 hours, Baumhammers had killed 5 people from 5 different racial and ethnic backgrounds: Jewish, Indian, Chinese, Vietnamese, and African-American. He bypassed white individuals he encountered during the rampage, a fact that prosecutors later emphasized as evidence of selective targeting. As he fled the karate studio, police departments across multiple jurisdictions were already broadcasting alerts with his vehicle description. Officer Jeff Fratangeli of the Aliquippa Police Department spotted the Jeep on Route 51 and confirmed the license plate. He waited for backup. When additional units arrived, an Aimbridge police officer initiated the traffic stop. After Baumhammers ran 2 red lights, officers boxed in the Jeep and forced him to pull over. He surrendered without resistance. Inside the vehicle, officers found approximately 20 rounds of live ammunition, Molotov cocktails, spray paint cans, and other materials tied to the shootings and synagogue vandalism. A search of his home revealed a 3-page manifesto promoting violence against minorities and immigrants. It also contained statements accusing intelligence agencies of persecuting him, describing rigid racial hierarchies, and blaming immigration for economic decline. Investigators determined that he had mapped out his route in advance and selected locations that aligned with his racial and religious motives. Baumhammers was initially found incompetent to stand trial due to active delusions. After months of treatment at a secure psychiatric facility, he was declared competent in September 2000. His trial began in April 2001. The defense relied on an insanity argument supported by psychiatric records and expert testimony describing long-term delusions, paranoia, and impaired judgment. His father testified emotionally about the years of deterioration and the family's inability to secure long-term intervention for their son. Prosecutor Edward Borkowski countered by highlighting Baumhammers' calculated behavior. He pointed out that Baumhammers purchased weapons legally, navigated multiple municipalities without becoming lost or confused, and deliberately spared white individuals. Surveillance footage and witness statements showed he acted with composure during each attack, reloaded methodically, and moved quickly between locations, according to a pre-selected plan. The prosecution argued this demonstrated intent, not uncontrollable psychosis. The jury convicted Baumhammers on May 9, 2001, finding him guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder, ethnic intimidation, arson, and related charges. During the penalty phase, 15 witnesses testified about the devastation experienced by the victims' families. 2 days later, jurors recommended the death penalty. Judge Jeffrey Manning formally sentenced him to death by lethal injection. Baumhammers became the 241st inmate on Pennsylvania's death row. He was transferred to the State Correctional Institution at Greene, and later moved to Cy Phoenix, where all Pennsylvania death-sentenced inmates are currently housed. His appeals have lasted more than 2 decades. He has argued ineffective counsel, challenged the accuracy of psychiatric evaluations, and claimed violations of constitutional rights. But state and federal courts have rejected every petition. Multiple governors have upheld the moratorium on executions first instituted by Governor Tom Wolf in 2015, meaning Baumhammers is unlikely to be executed despite the sentence. Communities affected by the attacks continue to memorialize the victims. Families of those killed have repeatedly expressed frustration at the lack of finality, and officials such as Center Township Police Chief Barry Kramer have sent letters to Pennsylvania governors, urging them to lift the moratorium, arguing that the sentence should be carried out to honor the victims and uphold the jury's decision. Baumhammers' case is examined in academic and law enforcement circles as an example of how untreated severe mental illness can intersect with extremist ideology, particularly when firearms are legally accessible to individuals with documented psychiatric instability. The case also exposes the failure of multiple systems to intervene, despite repeated warning signs, arrests abroad, psychiatric evaluations, online extremism, racial obsession, and clear deterioration inside the home. His rampage remains one of the most disturbing acts of racially motivated violence in Pennsylvania history. It highlighted the danger of an individual who combined delusion, methodical planning, and hatred into a series of targeted murders. And while his victims belonged to communities he had fixated on through propaganda and conspiracy theories, the broader aftermath left an impact across the state, raising questions about mental health treatment, gun access, and how early warning signs are handled when a person has both the intelligence and education to mask the depth of their instability.